Clara Bennett had stopped believing in second chances the day she buried her husband. 3 years had passed since the accident that took Michael from her, and in that time she had learned to survive without truly living. At 41, she ran a small bakery in the quiet coastal town of Monterey, California, waking before dawn to knead dough and shape pastries, filling her hours with flour and sugar so she would not have to fill them with memory. Her daughter, Sophie, was 19 now, studying, nursing at a university 2 hours away, and Clara had grown accustomed to the silence of her empty house, to dinners eaten alone at the kitchen counter, to nights spent reading until her eyes burned because sleep brought dreams she did not want to have. The morning everything changed began like any other October morning, with fog rolling in from the Pacific and the scent of salt hanging heavy in the air. Clara arrived at her bakery at 4:30, unlocking the back door and stepping into the familiar warmth of the kitchen. She moved through her routine without thinking, measuring ingredients, preheating ovens, her hands knowing the work so well that her mind could wander elsewhere. She thought about the mortgage payment due next week, about the leaking pipe in the bathroom she kept meaning to fix, about whether Sophie would come home for Thanksgiving this year or spend it with her new boyfriend's family instead. By 6 o'clock, the display cases were filled with croissants and muffins and the cinnamon rolls that had made her bakery famous in town. Clara unlocked the front door, flipped the sign from closed to open, and took her place behind the counter. The first customers trickled in slowly, the usual faces, the retired schoolteacher who always ordered black coffee and a blueberry scone, the young mother who brought her toddler for a chocolate chip cookie every Tuesday and Thursday. And then, at precisely 7:15, a man Clara had never seen before walked through her door. He was tall, perhaps 6'2", with broad shoulders and silver-streaked dark hair cut short. His face was weathered in a way that suggested years spent outdoors, deep lines around his eyes, a strong jaw shadowed with stubble. He wore simple clothes, dark jeans and a grey sweater, nothing that would draw attention, and yet Clara found herself unable to look away. There was something about the way he carried himself, a stillness that seemed almost deliberate, as though every movement had been considered and chosen with care. He approached the counter slowly, his dark eyes scanning the display cases before settling on Clara. When he spoke, his voice was low and quiet, with a slight accent she could not quite place. "I will have a coffee," he said. "And whatever you recommend." Clara felt her cheeks warm, surprised by her own reaction. She was not a woman who blushed, had not blushed in years, and she turned quickly toward the coffee machine to hide her face. She poured his coffee and selected a cinnamon roll from the case, her hands steady despite the strange flutter in her chest. "The cinnamon rolls are the best thing here," she said, sliding the plate across the counter. "At least, that is what people tell me." The man smiled, just slightly, the corners of his mouth lifting in a way that transformed his serious face into something almost gentle. "You made them yourself," he said. It was not a question. Clara nodded, unsure why his certainty pleased her so much. The man paid in cash, leaving a generous tip, and took his coffee and pastry to a small table by the window. He sat there for nearly an hour, drinking slowly, watching the fog burn off as the sun rose higher. Clara found herself glancing at him more often than she should, noticing the way he held his cup with both hands, the way he seemed entirely comfortable in his own stillness. When he finally stood to leave, he paused at the counter. "Thank you," he said. The cinnamon roll was perfect, as was the recommendation. Before Clara could respond, he was gone, disappearing into the brightening morning like he had never been there at all. She did not expect to see him again. But the next morning, at precisely 7:15, he returned. This became their pattern over the following weeks. Every day the man would arrive at the same time, order coffee and whatever Clara recommended, and sit by the window until his cup was empty. They exchanged few words at first, just pleasantries about the weather or the quality of the pastries, but gradually their conversations grew longer. Clara learned that his name was Daniel Moretti, that he had recently moved to Monterey from the East Coast, that his wife had passed away 5 years ago, and he had come to California seeking something he could not quite name. "I think I was looking for quiet," he told her one morning. "I spent so many years surrounded by noise. I wanted to hear the ocean." Clara understood. She told him about Michael, about the car accident that had taken him instantly, about the years she had spent learning to breathe again. She told him about Sophie, about how proud she was of her daughter and how much she missed having her home. She told him things she had not told anyone in years, and Daniel listened with the same careful stillness he brought to everything, his dark eyes holding hers with an attention that made her feel seen in a way she had forgotten was possible. One evening, as Clara was closing the bakery, Daniel appeared at the door. He was carrying a bottle of wine and 2 glasses, and when Clara raised her eyebrows in question, he smiled that slight, transforming smile. "I thought perhaps you might like company," he said. "I know a place on the cliff where you can see the sunset. If you are not too tired." Clara should have said no. She barely knew this man, had no business going anywhere with him alone, and yet something in his voice, something in the way he looked at her, made her reach for her, jacket and follow him outside. They drove in his car, a simple black sedan winding up the coastal road until they reached a pullout overlooking the Pacific. The sun was beginning its descent, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, and Clara felt something loosen in her chest as she watched the colors spread across the water. Daniel poured them each a glass of wine, and they sat on the hood of his car, shoulders almost touching, listening to the waves crash against the rocks below. "Pauvre." "Wife's name was Elena," Daniel said quietly. "She was sick for a long time before she passed. Watching her fade, it changed me, made me understand what matters." Clara turned to look at him, seeing the grief in his eyes, the weight he carried. She recognized it because she carried the same weight herself. "What matters?" she asked softly. Daniel was silent for a long moment. Then he turned to face her, his expression serious. "Connection," he said, "finding someone who makes the silence feel less empty. Someone worth protecting." Clara's breath caught. She was not sure who moved first, whether she leaned toward him or he leaned toward her, but suddenly his lips were on hers, gentle and warm, tasting of wine and salt air. The kiss lasted only a few seconds, but when they pulled apart, Clara felt as though something fundamental had shifted inside her. For the first time in 3 years, she felt alive. Over the following months, their relationship deepened. Daniel was a constant presence in Clara's life, helping her with repairs around the bakery, cooking dinner for her on nights she worked late, driving her to Sophie's graduation ceremony, and sitting quietly at her side while she cried tears of pride. He was gentle and attentive, anticipating her needs before she voiced them, and Clara found herself falling in love with him in a way she had not thought possible. At her age, after everything she had lost, she had assumed her heart was too scarred for new love. Daniel proved her wrong. But there were things about Daniel that did not quite fit. Small things at first, the way he always seemed aware of his surroundings, scanning every room before he entered it. The way certain men would nod to him on the street with a deference that seemed excessive. The way he never spoke about his work, deflecting her questions with a smile and a change of subject. The expensive watch he wore, the car that was always immaculately maintained, the ease with which he paid for everything in cash. Clara told herself it did not matter. Whatever Daniel's past held, he was good to her now. That was what counted. Then, one night, everything changed. They were at Daniel's house, a large Mediterranean-style villa on the hill overlooking the bay. Clara had been there many times before, had grown comfortable in its elegant rooms, but tonight something felt different. Daniel was tense, distracted, checking his phone repeatedly and staring out the window at the dark road below. When Clara asked what was wrong, he shook his head. "Just business," he said. "Nothing for you to worry about." But his voice was tight, and Clara felt a chill run down her spine. Around midnight, there was a knock at the door. Daniel's expression hardened, and he stood quickly, motioning for Clara to stay where she was. She watched as he walked to the door and opened it to reveal 2 men in dark suits, their faces grim. They spoke in low voices, Italian words Clara could not understand, and then Daniel turned to, "Look at her." "Clara," he said quietly, I need to tell you something." Her heart was pounding as she stood and walked toward him. The two men stepped aside, watching her with unreadable expressions, and Daniel took her hand. "I have not been entirely honest with you," he said, "about who I am, about my past." Clara felt the world tilt beneath her feet. "My name is Daniel Moretti," he continued, "but some people know me by another name. Some people call me Don Moretti." The words hung in the air between them, and Clara felt as though she could not breathe. "I am the head of a family," Daniel said, "a family that has controlled certain business interests on the East Coast for generations. I left that world when Eleanor died, came here to start over, but the past has a way of finding you." Clara stared at him, unable to speak. The man standing before her, the quiet widower who brought her wine and watched sunsets by her side, was the leader of a crime organization, a Mafia boss. Everything she thought she knew about him had been a lie. "I never wanted to hide this from you," Daniel said, his voice heavy with something that might have been regret. "But I did not know how to tell you. I was afraid you would leave." Clara pulled her hand from his. Her mind was racing, trying to reconcile the Daniel she knew with this revelation, this impossible truth. She thought of all the moments they had shared, all the tenderness he had shown her, and wondered how much of it had been real. "I need to go," she whispered. Daniel's face fell, but he did not try to stop her. He simply nodded, stepping aside to let her pass. "I will have Marco drive you home," he said quietly. "And Clara, I understand if you never want to see me again, but please know that everything I felt for you was real. You are the first person who has made me feel human in a very long time." Clara did not respond. She walked out into the night, her eyes burning with tears she refused to let fall, and climbed into the waiting car without looking back. Check if you are already subscribed to this channel. If you have ever watched a story that made your heart race, if you have ever stayed up late wondering what happens next, then this is where you belong. Subscribe now so you never miss a moment of what is coming. The days that followed were the longest of Clara's life. She threw herself into work, arriving at the bakery even earlier than usual, staying until long after the sun went down. She refused to think about Daniel, refused to remember the way he had looked at her, the gentleness in his touch. She told herself she had been a fool, that she should have seen the signs, that love at her age was nothing but a cruel illusion. But late at night, alone in her empty house, the truth crept in around the edges of her denial. She missed him. Sophie called one evening, her voice bright with news about her classes and her boyfriend and the apartment she was planning to rent after graduation. Clara listened and made appropriate sounds of encouragement, but her heart was not in it. When Sophie asked what was wrong, Clara almost told her everything, almost admitted that she had fallen in love with a man who turned out to be someone she never could have imagined. But the words would not come, and she changed the subject instead. A week after the revelation, Clara found an envelope slipped under the bakery's front door. Inside was a single sheet of paper, covered in Daniel's elegant handwriting. "Clara, I know you do not want to hear from me, and I will respect your wishes if you tell me to stop. But I cannot let you believe that what we had was a deception. I am the man you knew. I am still the man who fell in love with you over cinnamon rolls and sunsets. Yes, there is another part of my life, a darker part, but that part has never touched you and never will. I have spent 5 years trying to leave that world behind, and meeting you made me believe it might actually be possible. Please just give me one chance to explain, one conversation. After that, if you still want me gone, I will disappear from your life forever." Daniel Clara read the letter 3 times before folding it carefully and placing it in her apron pocket. She spent the rest of the day distracted, burning a batch of muffins and giving wrong change to 3 different customers. By closing time, she had made her decision. She drove to Daniel's house as the sun was setting, her hands trembling on the steering wheel. When she knocked on the door, he answered immediately, as though he had been waiting for her. His eyes were shadowed with exhaustion, and Clara could see that the past week had been as difficult for him as it had been for her. "One conversation," she said. "That is all." Daniel nodded and stepped aside to let her in. They sat in his living room, the same room where he had made his confession, and Daniel began to talk. He told her about his family, the Moretti organization that had controlled territories along the eastern seaboard for 3 generations. He told her about growing up surrounded by power and violence, about the expectations placed on him as the eldest son, about the day he became head of the family when his father suffered a heart attack. He told her about the years he had spent trying to move the organization's interests toward legitimate business, about the enemies he had made and the compromises he had been forced to accept. And he told her about Elena. She knew everything. Daniel said quietly, who I was, what I had done. She loved me anyway. But the stress of that life, the constant fear, it wore on her. When she got sick, the doctors said it was not related, but I always wondered. I always blamed myself. Clara listened without interrupting, watching the emotions cross his face. This was not the cold, calculating criminal she had imagined. This was a man weighted down by choices he had not entirely made himself, trapped by a legacy he had spent years trying to escape. When Elena died, Daniel continued, I made a decision. I left everything behind, handed control of the organization to my younger brother, moved across the country, bought this house. I told myself I was done, that I would spend the rest of my life as just another retired businessman watching the ocean. And then I walked into your bakery, and everything changed. His eyes met hers, and Clara saw the same vulnerability she had seen that first day by the window. I love you, Clara. Not despite who I am, but because of who I become when I am with you. You make me want to be better. You make me believe I actually can be. Clara was silent for a long moment. Her mind was still spinning, still trying to process everything she had learned. But beneath the confusion she felt something else, something that felt dangerously like hope. Your brother, she said finally, the one who took over the organization. Is that why you were so tense that night? Is something happening? Daniel's expression flickered. Yes, he admitted, there are problems. Conflicts with other families, internal disputes. My brother has asked for my help. I've been trying to refuse, but the past does not release its grip easily. Are you in danger? Daniel hesitated before answering. Possibly, he said. There are people who believe I have information, contacts, resources that could tip the balance. Coming after me would be a way to send a message. Clara felt her chest tighten. The fear she felt was not for herself but for him, and that realization told her everything she needed to know about her own heart. I do not know if I can do this, she said slowly. I do not know if I am strong enough to love someone whose world is so different from mine. But I am not ready to walk away either. Not yet. Daniel reached out and took her hand, his fingers warm against hers. That is all I ask, he said. Just a chance. Over the following weeks, Clara learned what it meant to love a man with Daniel's past. There were men who appeared at strange hours speaking in hushed voices. There were phone calls Daniel took in other rooms, his face grave when he returned. There were moments when Clara saw something hard and dangerous flash in his eyes, a reminder that the quiet widower she knew was not the whole truth. But there was also tenderness. Daniel brought her flowers every week, always her favorites, white roses and purple irises. He sat with her in the bakery after closing, helping her clean and talking about everything and nothing. He made her laugh with stories from his childhood, tales of mischief and adventure that seemed impossible to reconcile with the serious man he had become. He held her at night when she could not sleep, his arms wrapped around her like a shield, and whispered promises she wanted desperately to believe. One evening, Daniel took Clara to meet his mother. Rosa Moretti was 83 years old, a tiny woman with sharp eyes and silver hair pulled back in an elegant knot. She lived in a small cottage on Daniel's property, tended by a nurse who Rosa constantly tried to dismiss. When Clara walked through the door, Rosa looked her up and down with an expression that gave nothing away. So, Rosa said, you are the baker. Clara nodded, unsure how to respond. Rosa's face broke into a slow smile. Good, she said. My son needs someone who can make him eat properly. He is too thin. They had dinner together, the three of them, and Clara found herself charmed by Rosa's sharp wit and obvious love for her son. The older woman told stories of Daniel as a boy, of his kindness and his stubbornness, of how he had always been different from his brothers. "He has a good heart," Rosa said quietly, when Daniel stepped away to take a phone call. "He carries more weight than anyone should have to carry, but his heart has always been good." "You can see that, yes?" Clara nodded. "I can see it," she said. Rosa reached out and patted her hand. "Then hold on to him," she said. "Men like my son do not come along often. They need someone who sees past the darkness to the light underneath." Clara thought about those words as Daniel drove her home that night. She was beginning to understand that loving Daniel meant accepting all of him, the quiet tenderness and the dangerous shadows, the man who brought her roses and the man who commanded respect from people she would never meet. She was beginning to think she might be able to do that. But then the past came calling, and everything Clara thought she understood was thrown into chaos. It started with a phone call. Clara was alone in the bakery, preparing for the morning rush, when her phone rang with an unfamiliar number. She answered without thinking, expecting a vendor or a wrong number. "Clara Bennett?" The voice was male, cold, unfamiliar. "Who is this?" "Someone who wants to help you. You are involved with Daniel Moretti. That is a dangerous choice." Clara felt her blood run cold. "I do not know what you are talking about," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. The man laughed softly. "Of course you do. Everyone in our world knows about the baker who caught the Don's attention. Such a sweet story. But I wonder, does the baker know what her Don is really capable of?" Before Clara could respond, the line went dead. She stood frozen in the kitchen, her heart pounding. The phone felt heavy in her hand, and she stared at it as though it might ring again at any moment. When it did not, she forced herself to move, to breathe, to finish her preparations for the day. But her hands were shaking as she arranged the pastries in the display case, and she jumped at every sound. That evening, she told Daniel about the call. His face went pale, and for a moment, Clara saw something in his eyes that frightened her. Not anger exactly, something colder, something that reminded her that the man she loved had once commanded an empire built on power and fear. "Did he threaten you?" Daniel asked quietly. Clara shook her head. "Not directly. He just said being with you was dangerous, that I did not know what you were capable of." Daniel was silent for a long moment. Then he stood and walked to the window, his back to her. "I have tried so hard to leave that world behind," he said, "but there are people who will never let me go, people who see my walking away as a betrayal or an opportunity." "What does he want?" Daniel turned to face her. "There is a situation brewing. Territories, alliances, the usual conflicts. Some people believe I still have influence, connections. They want to use me as a pawn or remove me as a threat. Either way, I have become a target." Clara felt fear clutch at her heart. "And by being with you, I have become one too." Daniel crossed the room and took her hands in his. "I will not let anyone hurt you," he said fiercely. "I will protect you with everything I have. But I understand if you want to leave. If this is too much, if you need to walk away, I will not blame you." Clara looked into his eyes, seeing the fear there, the guilt, the desperate love. She thought about her quiet life before Daniel, the empty house and the silent dinners and the long nights reading until her eyes burned. She had been safe, yes, but she had not been alive. "I am not leaving," she said. Daniel's arms wrapped around her, pulling her close, and Clara let herself rest against his chest. She could hear his heart beating, steady and strong, and she held on to that sound like a promise. The next few days were tense. Daniel brought in additional security, men who patrolled the property and accompanied Clara to and from the bakery. He spent hours on the phone, speaking in Italian, his voice low and urgent. Clara did not ask what he was doing, what plans he was making. She was not sure she wanted to know. She continued running her bakery, smiling at customers and making small talk, pretending everything was normal. But at night, alone in her house, she lay awake listening for sounds that did not belong, imagining shadows moving in the darkness outside her window. On the fifth day, the situation escalated. Clara was walking to her car after closing when she noticed a black SUV parked across the street. Two men sat inside, watching her. She quickened her pace, her heart hammering, and when she reached her car, she fumbled with the keys, her hands trembling. Before she could unlock the door, one of the men stepped out of the SUV. "Mrs. Bennett," he called. "A moment of your time." Clara did not respond. She managed to get the door open and slip inside, locking it immediately. The man approached her window, leaning down to look at her through the glass. "We just want to talk," he said. "About your friend Daniel. About certain information he has that could be very valuable to the right people." Clara started the engine. "I have nothing to say to you." The man smiled, and it was not a pleasant smile. "You might change your mind. After all, it would be a shame if something happened to that pretty little bakery of yours, or to that daughter studying up north." Clara felt the world go red. Before she knew what she was doing, she was reversing out of the parking space, nearly hitting the man as he jumped back. She did not stop, did not slow down, just drove with her foot pressed hard on the accelerator until she reached Daniel's house. She told him everything, her words tumbling over each other in her panic. When she mentioned Sophie, Daniel's face went stone cold. "Your daughter," he said. "Where is she exactly?" "At the university, Berkeley. She lives in an apartment near campus." Daniel was already reaching for his phone. Within minutes, he had arranged for two of his men to travel to Berkeley immediately. They would watch Sophie, keep her safe, without her ever knowing they were there. "I will not let them touch her," Daniel said. "I swear to you on my life." Clara believed him. In that moment, watching the fierce protectiveness in his eyes, she understood why men followed him. Why? People spoke his name with respect and fear. He was not just a businessman who had stepped away from a dark world. He was a leader, a protector, someone who would burn down everything in his path to keep the people he loved safe. And Clara was one of those people. The days that followed were a blur of tension and waiting. Daniel's men reported that Sophie was safe, going about her normal routine, completely unaware of the shadows watching over her. Clara tried to maintain her own routine, opening the bakery each morning, serving customers, pretending everything was fine. But she was always aware of the security detail Daniel had assigned to her, the men who sat in a car across the street and followed her home each night. If you are watching this and feeling the weight of this moment in your heart, take a second to leave a comment saying, "I would do anything to protect my family." That single sentence carries more truth than 1,000 words ever could. 1 week after the confrontation in the parking lot, Daniel came to Clara with news. "I have identified the people behind the threats," he said. "A family from Chicago. They have been expanding their territory, making moves against established interests. They see me as an obstacle. What are you going to do?" Daniel was quiet for a moment. "I have to handle this," he said finally. "I have tried to stay out of it, tried to let my brother manage things, but this has become personal. They threatened you. They threatened your daughter. I cannot let that stand." Clara felt fear rise in her chest. "Handle it how?" Daniel took her hands. "There are things I need to do that you are better off not knowing about. But I promise you, when this is over, we will be safe. All of us." Clara wanted to argue, wanted to demand that he explain everything, but she saw the resolve in his eyes and knew that nothing she said would change his mind. This was who Daniel was, the man who had led a criminal empire, the man who would do whatever was necessary to protect what he loved. "Just come back to me," she whispered. "Always," Daniel said. He pressed a kiss to her forehead and walked out the door. The next 3 days were the longest of Clara's life. She heard nothing from Daniel, received no updates, had no idea where he was or what he was doing. She went through the motions of her days, baking and serving and smiling, but her mind was elsewhere. At night she sat by the window, watching the road, waiting for headlights that did not come. On the 4th night her phone rang. It was Daniel. "It is done," he said. His voice was exhausted but calm. "You are safe. Sophie is safe. No one will threaten you again." Clara closed her eyes, relief washing over her in waves. "Are you okay?" "I am on my way home," Daniel said. I will see you soon." He arrived at her house an hour later, looking more tired than she had ever seen him. There were dark circles under his eyes, and he moved stiffly, like someone nursing hidden injuries. But when he saw her standing in the doorway, his face softened and he opened his arms. Clara ran to him. They held each other for a long time, not speaking, just breathing. Finally, Daniel pulled back and looked at her. "I want to tell you everything," he said. "No more secrets. No more hiding. If we are going to build a life together, you deserve to know who I really am." Clara nodded. They went inside, and Daniel told her. He told her about the meetings he had taken, the alliances he had called in, the pressure he had applied through channels both legal and otherwise. He told her about the confrontation with the Chicago family, a tense negotiation in a neutral location that had ended with an agreement, a truce purchased at a price Clara did not fully understand. He told her about the cost of that peace, the favors he now owed, the pieces of himself he had given up. "I did things," Daniel said quietly, "things I had hoped never to do again, but I would do them 1,000 times over to keep you safe." Clara listened without judgment. She understood now that Daniel's world was not black and white, but an endless spectrum of grey, a place where good men sometimes did terrible things, and terrible men sometimes showed unexpected kindness. She could not condone everything he had done, but she could accept it. She could love him anyway. "I am not afraid of who you are," she said. "I am only afraid of losing you." Daniel pulled her close. "You will never lose me," he promised. "I am yours, for as long as you will have me." The months that followed were a gradual return to normalcy, or something close to it. Daniel kept his promise to step back from the darker parts of his world, delegating responsibilities to his brother and focusing instead on legitimate business interests. He helped Clara expand her bakery, funding renovations and new equipment, though she insisted on paying him back with interest. They fell into a comfortable routine, dinners together, walks along the cliffs, quiet evenings, reading side by side. Sophie came home for Christmas that year, and Clara introduced her to Daniel. She had been nervous about the meeting, unsure how her daughter would react, but Sophie took to him immediately. By the end of the holiday, she was calling him by his first name and teasing him about his terrible taste in movies. "He is good for you, Mum," Sophie said the night before she left to go back to school. "I have not seen you this happy in years." Clara smiled. "I know." Spring arrived, and with it came Rosa's 84th birthday. Daniel organized a celebration at his house, inviting family and friends, filling the rooms with flowers and music. Clara baked a 3-tier cake, each layer a different flavor, spending days perfecting the decorations. When Rosa saw it, her eyes filled with tears. "You are family now," the old woman said, taking Clara's hands. "You know that, yes?" Clara felt her own eyes grow wet. "I do." That summer, Daniel took Clara to Italy. It was her first time, leaving the country, and she walked through the streets of Rome and Florence and Venice in a daze of wonder. Daniel showed her the places he had loved as a child, the villages where his grandparents had lived, the church where his parents had been married. He spoke of his family's history with a mixture of pride and sadness, and Clara listened, understanding better with each story the weight of the legacy he carried. On their last night, standing on a balcony overlooking the Grand Canal, Daniel got down on one knee. "Clara Bennett," he said, holding a ring that caught the light of the setting sun, "I have spent my life surrounded by power and wealth, and none of it meant anything until I met you. You showed me that there is more to life than survival, that there is joy and warmth and love. Will you marry me?" Clara looked at the man kneeling before her, the quiet widower who had walked into her bakery and changed everything. She thought of all they had been through, the secrets and the danger and the moments of pure, unexpected happiness. She thought of the future stretching out before them, uncertain but full of promise. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I will marry you." They were married the following autumn, in a small ceremony on the cliffs overlooking Monterey Bay. Sophie stood as Clara's maid of honor, and Rosa watched from the front row, dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. The sun was setting as they exchanged vows, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, and Clara felt as though the entire world was celebrating with them. The reception was held at Daniel's house, transformed for the occasion into a wonderland of lights and flowers. Clara danced with her new husband as their guests cheered, feeling younger and lighter than she had in years. When Daniel dipped her at the end of the song, she laughed, and the sound of her own joy surprised her. "Mrs. Moretti," Daniel said, his eyes bright. "That has a nice ring to it." Clara smiled and kissed him. "I think so too." The years that followed brought their share of challenges. Daniel's world never entirely let him go, and there were moments when the past reached out to remind them both of who he had been. But they faced each obstacle together, supporting each other through the hard times and celebrating together during the good. Sophie graduated from nursing school and took a job at a hospital nearby, close enough to visit every weekend. Rosa lived to see her 88th birthday, surrounded by family, before passing peacefully in her sleep. And through it all, Clara never stopped being amazed by the life she had found. She thought about it sometimes, on quiet mornings at the bakery, kneading dough as the sun rose over the Pacific. She thought about the woman she had been before Daniel, the widow going through the motions of living, and she marveled at how much had changed. She had believed that love was over for her, that her heart had been closed forever by grief. She had been wrong. Love, she had learned, did not follow rules or schedules. It arrived when you least expected it in the form of a quiet widower with dark eyes and a dangerous past. It asked you to be brave, to accept the unacceptable, to build something new on the ruins of everything you thought you knew, and if you were willing to take the risk, if you were willing to open your heart despite the fear, it could transform your entire life. Clara was living proof. One evening, 5 years after their wedding, Clara and Daniel sat on their favorite spot on the cliff, watching the sun sink into the ocean. The air was cool and clean, smelling of salt and eucalyptus, and Clara leaned her head against Daniel's shoulder. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked, "leaving everything behind?" Daniel was quiet for a moment. Then he shook his head. "The only thing I would regret," he said, "is not walking into that bakery, not finding the courage to start over. Everything else, all the things I left behind, they were just noise. You are the music." Clara smiled and took his hand. They sat together in comfortable silence as the sky turned from gold to purple to black, and the stars began to emerge one by one. She had believed love was over. She had been gloriously, beautifully wrong. If you have watched this far, it is because this story touched something real inside you. Leave a comment saying, "I watched this far," so I can get to know you and see who really enjoys the stories here on the channel. And if this story made you feel something, if it reminded you that love can find us when we least expect it, then please take a moment to hit the like button. Your support helps these stories reach more people who need to hear them. Finally, if you know someone who could use a little hope today, share this video with them. You never know whose heart might need this story right now. Thank you for watching. Thank you for being here. And remember, no matter how dark things seem, love always finds a way. Until next time.